Okay, we'll get started. I will now call to order tonight's meeting of the Evanston Preservation Commission. We have a quorum, and I just counted and I've forgotten already. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 commissioners present. The City of Evanston's Preservation Ordinance empowers this body to oversee and administer the city's historic preservation program. During our monthly public meetings, we encourage public participation, afford due process through public hearings on proposed landmark designations and applications for certificates of appropriateness, and discuss ways to advance long-range planning goals beyond case review. We ask anyone who wishes to address the commission to sign in and indicate the discussion item, designation, or application to be addressed. The first order of business tonight will be public comment on items listed under discussion on the meeting agenda. For old and new business, I will ask staff to read each case into the record. Once a case has been read into the record, the applicant presents an overview of the proposal, including evidence and testimony that support the applicable review standards being met. Commissioners will then ask questions of the applicant. Following the questioning period, members of the public may speak toward the application, keeping their comments to 3 minutes or less. Following public comment, the applicant will have the opportunity to respond to any evidence or testimony against the application as it relates to the review standards. The commission then closes the record and proceeds to deliberation and a motion to approve the proposal or approve with conditions. A simple majority of the quorum present is required for a motion to carry. And after old and new business conclude, the commission considers the previous public meetings minutes and then discusses actions pertaining to long-range planning goals. Okay. First order of business is public comment. Are there any members of the public here wishing to speak on items under Section 6, discussion, no vote will be taken? Okay, did we have anyone online? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to new business. If staff could please read the first item into the record.
Case number 23 PRS 0208, 1021 Forest Avenue, a landmark in the Lakeshore Historic District. Shoemaker Design Associates, architect and applicant on behalf of the homeowner, requests a certificate of appropriateness to alter an existing single-story 3-car detached garage, constructing a second-story addition atop the existing ground floor footprint for use as an accessory dwelling unit, and constructing a new 2-story addition to the structure's north volume. Preservation Commission is the determining body for the certificate of appropriateness per Code Section 288. I believe, yep, Gary's here. When you're ready, Gary. I'm having some minor technical issues with the, here we go.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Gary Shoemaker. I'm with Shoemaker Design Associates, and I'm here on behalf of my clients who own the home at 1021 Forest. The project, are we ready? Oh, I can control it now.
Gary, sorry. Can everyone hear him? Because I can't tell if his mic is working.
I think
It's
I
okay.
can hear it back here. Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. These are images of the existing structure. This is the house that faces Forest. The project that we're proposing is in the back of the house, which is part of, oh wait, do I have a pointer? There we go. Which is an addition on top of and a small expansion of this existing garage located in the rear of the property. So these views show the context between the existing house and the existing garage and the facade of the existing garage in the back. Site plans. The existing garage is here. This is an existing non-conforming condition, which is very close to that corner lot line. We're not asking for anything other than some minor accommodations for that, so we're not talking about any major variations for this. We are removing some of the paving and some garden space here in order to clear the way in this zone for a small addition that would contain the entry stair and entry sequence that would allow us to maintain the existing garage access and the three cars of off-street parking required for the site. Existing plans of the garage. So you see the existing footprint of the 3-car garage here. And this is our first floor addition that includes the stair, a small storage area, and maintenance of the existing access to the side of the garage from the man door. So the roof plan, there's an existing hipped roof on this house, which is not common to this property. The house has very large Tudor-style gables. This is an arts and crafts home, so the style of this roof line is not necessarily in keeping with the context of the existing home. The project that we've proposed is a second-story addition, which has a telescoping section that contains our stair stepping down here, and 2 large gables which mimic the gables on the existing house. This particular house, if you saw, I'll flip back here for just a moment. On the back of the house, this was an addition done by a previous owner. These large gables and the large gable you see in the front are all original to the house. So as we go to our elevations, this is the elevation facing the back of the house. This isn't a visible elevation to the public way. But to show you what we've done is taken the proportions, the detail, and the elegance of that large gabled end and matched it against the back of the house, creating more of a courtyard space that's sympathetic with the rest of the vernacular and style of the architecture. This gable end faces south. This is against the neighboring property. This overlooks the existing 1-story garage that they have on that side. And these are obviously the existing conditions of the house. This belt course of stone and limestone we're maintaining. We're relocating and spreading out these windows in order to create this mass and the extension to house the addition above it. This is the alley facing, or the visible, the face, the public facing side. These garage doors will remain. You see the belt course again, the brickwork, the masonry, the garage doors, and the proportions are all in keeping here, continuing the brickwork around the addition, and you can see the diagram of how the stair functions inside there. Again, context for the existing. This is the north-facing elevation, which overlooks the garden in the backyard of the existing house. Again, taking advantage of the light that we get in the back of the house, also the proportion of the large transom-oriented openings that are in the back of the house as it exists now. Again, you can see that we've taken the proportions of those gable ends and the soffit conditions from the main house to replicate those to scale into this addition. I think we duplicated a few slides in there. Sorry about that. So again, looking back from this is from a tree overlooking the alley, from the alley in a tree looking over the fence, but you can see the proportion of the back of the house here in that 1-story addition and the distance between there. So our 2-story structure comes in right there. We've provided some renderings of the project so you can understand the scale of these gables, the proportions of these things as they're seen from the alley side. Again, looking across the alley, across the fence toward the back of the house, the eaves, the overhangs, and the proportions of that are all in keeping with the common details of this historic structure. Again, the belt course of limestone and masonry continue around the house. And looking from the house across the backyard, back at the structure, there's the entrance and the existing side door to the garage and that gable end facing the backyard. The windows in the house are a combination of existing wood windows and Marvin replacement windows, or not replacement, but Marvin windows. We would use similar Marvin windows throughout this project. The windows in the first floor that we are keeping or relocating, these are also Marvin windows. None of those are of historic value, but we are going to reuse them. They're perfectly serviceable, so. And I think that's, other than paperwork, I think that's all we've got, so.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
Sure. Hi, Gary.
Hey, John.
The materials will all match the main house
Absolutely.
and the window mutton pattern that's from the main house? Okay, thank you.
It's a very minor thing, but I'm just wondering, on the proposed west elevation, the muttons on the second-story windows, the spacing seems, is that going to be equal third, 3 lights on the top?
Yes, there's something about this resolution has garbled our renderings a
fine,
little
if it
bit.
was
This-
just a-
Yeah, you're looking at the proportions here.
Right.
This is the east face, by the way, but yes, these proportions are all equal. They match the proportion of the existing. Yeah, because this is garbled as well.
It looks clear on my screen.
We
So it's the
I think it's the
projection.
projector.
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
public packet is fine.
I thought we sent a clear copy, but, okay.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this? Okay, seeing none, I think we will go ahead and close that part of it and have discussion among the commissioners. Does anyone want to start?
No, good. I'm new, so I wasn't quick enough on the draw. I was going to ask a question, but I think it's pretty clear. I was just curious because it really does look like the house, which is very nice. And I was wondering, the original garage almost has more of a almost prairie style feel with the long horizontal and the hipped roof. Did you think about using a hipped roof for the addition?
Gary, you can come back if you want to.
No, because this house doesn't have hip roof elements to it. This garage was modified heavily. I forget what year. Yeah, and the hip roof style is not compatible with this structure in our opinion.
So it's not an original. The garage is not original to
No,
the.
it's
The
from
roof is not
05, I
original
think
to the
is-
garage.
Yeah, my understanding is that it had
Give me a mic.
a significant addition to the garage. I think part of it is original, and they might have added 2 bays to it, something.
We saw that in your report, so we went back, and I've got a couple of photographs. That garage is 100% new.
Huh.
They tore down every stick of it. There might have been a corner of a foundation remaining, but it's not. The masonry doesn't match either. So while we are maintaining the belt course and what has acquired significance in the proportions of those windows and the stonework and the brickwork that matches the house, we do value that. But the roof line, we don't think it's not doing anything to the integrity of this particular property, and it doesn't speak to the house. So no, we didn't like the idea of a hipped roof over there.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Go ahead, yeah. Or commentary.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I think the design, first of all, I love seeing ADUs in these properties. I mean, I think that's a push from the city to have more housing. And I think the style in a vacuum is fine too. I do have some concerns. I know it does say in the packet we can talk about minor variations, although we don't necessarily give a recommendation around them. I did drive by this property today, the alley in the front. There's a lot of building on this property for those that, if you can look at the lot dimensions as well. But I personally I'd like to see the zoning recommendation in here was to keep an ADU over the existing garage and not have the addition. So for me, I do have some concerns about the exceeding the lot coverage by a significant amount and also the impermeability issues. on this. And again, we don't necessarily make recommendations, but it is in our purview to talk about the minor variations as well as the major variations.
There's 3 mics over here and only one works. Yeah, so just to be clear, it is very confusing. This is I think in the memo, this is a place where the code contradicts itself, and the ordinance is what overrules the zoning ordinance in this case. So it's conflicting in that the zoning ordinance says that minor variations be referred to the commission, but then the preservation ordinance does not empower you to make any recommendation on them. So you can hear, it says that you can review them is what the preservation ordinance says, but it shouldn't impact your decision, which should just be based on the standards themselves.
I just have another comment on that. Related to the standards, I do think they are related in the sense, I was looking at the standards as well. The alteration standard number 1, every reasonable effort shall be made to adapt the property, structure, site, or object in a manner that requires minimal alteration of the property, structure, site, or object and its environment. So for me, this probably isn't minimal because there's a lot of building on this property with that addition especially. And also keep in mind, there was an addition made in 2005 on the back of the house. The garage was made bigger. There's really not a lot of like open space on this property at the moment. So alteration 1 to me is a concern. And then also the construction variance number 5, rhythm of spacings and structures on the street. So the relationship of a structure or object to the open space between it and the adjoining structures or objects and the setback from the public way shall be visually compatible with the property, structures, sites, public ways, objects, in places to which it is visually related. So for me, that really ties into, I mean, it happens to tie in, but those are my concerns with this project, is the addition part of it, adding even more build on this property.
I think also the thing to consider is, I think the city of Evanston just introduced a tree ordinance, and I'm not sure what the dimensions of the tree are. I think that where the addition would be located, I think if a tree is 6 inches or more on private property, it has to go through a permitting process if it's within 25 feet of construction. So I think that's something that you were bringing up, Commissioner Ziem, too, that this addition is also going to be taking out a tree and adding more building to the lot.
And then if I can just clarify, it's my understanding that the tree preservation ordinance doesn't go into effect until they hire the certified arborist, which has not been done yet. So we do not have one currently.
I would like to ask the applicant a question, if I may. Just a follow-up. Do you have any plans on the property to kind of offset the fact that you're making something which is now permeable, impermeable?
So again, and just to be clear, minor variations are not the purview of this commission, but yes, we've been in ongoing discussions with Melissa Klotz to mitigate some of this, and we do plan when we go through the permitting process to accommodate some of that. So yes, but I don't, if it pleases the commission, we intend to take up a great deal of the paving in the back and replace it with permeable paving. We intend to do some more stormwater mitigation on the site, although there is no stormwater issue on this site, and the existing garage sheds not a whole lot more water, or not a whole lot less water than the new one will. What we're requesting to cover here is well within the minor variance standard in the city of Evanston based on lot sizes. It's maybe I think it's a 5% increase in the building lot coverage, but actually doesn't increase the impervious surface coverage. The addition does push that over, so by mitigating the impervious surface of the paving areas, the walks and things like that, will offset more than 50% of the addition coverage. But again, we're certainly working with Melissa and the zoning department to get to that point so that we can make our best effort to get the space that we need to accommodate this ADU. Again, not the purview of the commission, but the ADU standard also says that we cannot take parking away from this project. And the solution that Melissa and zoning had come up with was that we eliminate one of the parking bays, which is also in the face of the ADU ordinance, which I think in terms of affordable housing and things, we're working with everyone to try to get it done, but there are several moving parts in this, all of which are minor variations or negotiations we have to deal with on the other side. So, yes, but none of it's, I think, germane necessarily to the presentation we've had to make this evening. So,
Yeah, since it wasn't, since it came up in our conversation, I wanted to give you
I'm
an
happy to
opportunity.
clarify, but again, thank you.
I think also something to consider is, I mean, it's not on the property, but in the neighborhood on that alley, there is that large coach house that's also behind, a brick coach house behind the house that does take up a significant portion of the lot, probably built before the zoning code and, and all of that. I mean, historically, this is a neighborhood was probably built before the zoning code, so you're going to run into problems where, historic buildings were historically built or placed, before then a more modern zoning code was put into place, and then trying to add the accessory dwelling unit it's a lot. I mean, to try to take something built before and then fit it into something new, but it's something to consider. It's a nice design, so I think it's great.
So you're saying that, like, if you were to follow the ADU, sort of mandate or the rules there, in addition to the lot coverage, that is required, it would, if they were really, really sticklers on that, we might not see much more expansion of ADUs in these kinds of neighborhoods. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think so. I mean, these are lots that sometimes were built, to maximize buildable space, and, if they're trying to put an ADU in, yeah. I mean, and he's, like he said, it's a minor variation, so it's not like he's asking for a ton of requests. So.
I feel like we've covered that part, and maybe we should get back to the standards that we are required to look at. Does anyone have any comments for each other, for us, among ourselves, is what I'm trying to say, before we move to a vote? Okay. Seeing none, does somebody like to propose? Go ahead.
All right, for case 23 Pres 0208-1, for the property at 1021 Forest Avenue, a landmark in the Lake Shore Historic District, I move that we issue a certificate of appropriateness to alter an existing single-story, 3-car detached garage, constructing a second-story addition atop the existing ground floor footprint for use as an accessory dwelling unit, and constructing a new 2-story addition to the structure's north volume. Did I read the next one? The Preservation Commission is the determining body for the certificate of appropriateness per code section 288.
We do not necessarily have to read that part, but I just realized that there's no applicable standards here. Okay. All right. In that case, can I have a second? Is there a second? Second. All right. We'll just do all in favor. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? One opposed? And anyone abstaining? Okay, motion passes 7-1. Thank you. Moving on to the next order of business, 23 Pres-0193. Could staff please read that into the record?
Case number 23, PRES 0193, 927 Ridge Avenue in the Ridge Historic District. Tom Lemberis, contractor and applicant on behalf of the homeowner, requests a certificate of appropriateness to alter the structure's roofing material, replacing original slate tiles with asphalt shingles. Tom, are you here, or the homeowner? Or? Okay. I have Tom.
Tom.
Yeah.
No, that's
That's the contractor, I think? Yeah.
So my
Just-
name's Robert.
Yeah, just state your name and,
Robert Durston. Hi, Kate. Nice to meet you. Hello,
So-
commissioners.
You are the homeowner?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead when you're ready.
All right, we got visuals, right? So back in May of, was it May or no, April of 2020, there was a pretty bad hailstorm that for some reason hit our area of Evanston like really hard. In fact, like most of the houses right around me within the block have all gotten new roofs since then. Ours happens to be a 100-year-old slate roof, and my State Farm agent, I don't think, was aware when they gave us a policy because they came out and investigated and said, yeah, you need to, either replace it or repair it, but all of the gutters and downspouts need replacing. And so they wrote me a check for, I think, $2,700. And I was like, okay, well, that's a $5,000 deductible. So they thought it was under $8,000 of damage. And I reached out to some contractors and they were like, well, you need a new roof. This roof's 100 years old. There's like, one guy told me every tile of one of six needs to be replaced. And so I called State Farm and they were like, no, I think you're fine with that. And so we litigated, and it took 2.5 years, and we finally last summer litigated. My guy at Greenlight Construction said this was a $120,000 replace if we wanted to do slate, and I was like, I don't need to do slate. I don't need to. But he goes, but that's how you litigate. You do for the amount of the actual replacement, and so we sued for $120,000, and we went through litigation and we won, but we didn't win the amount. The litigator agreed to $72,500, of which the lawyer took 30. And so that left us with about $42,500 of an award. And then so we started looking at what we can afford, because slate is 120, and then Da Vinci, which is like nicer slate, was 132. And these are all, we shared these with Cade and Mr. Ruiz. And then there was another one called Presidential, which came in at $84,000 to replace. And so I just said, let's just put a normal roof on. And so that's what we proposed, and it was within our budget, but it got flagged. Got flagged because it changed the roof line and sight lines of the house too much. And so kindly enough, Mr. Ruiz found online another a presidential variant called what's it called? You found it. It's called Presidential, but it's Belmont. And this is it. This is the slide. On the left is the one that Mr. Ruiz directed us to, and it mimics pretty well the slate. Obviously, it's not slate, and it is still a little bit more expensive. It's close to $8,000 above and beyond, but that's what we're proposing to replace the slate roof with, and as well as the gutters and all the. There's a lot of is it brass or copper work? The dormers are copper, and then we have copper things like that. And I don't think we'll replace the copper with copper, just because copper is very expensive. But then the house is 100 years old, so there's existing damage that precluded us from just kind of going in and replacing the slate. And even if we were to do that, we would have to then update to code, which was putting down another sheathing. And so the most affordable thing was to replace the roof with a non-slate roof. So that's what we're asking your blessing. I don't know what your agreement on. Is that, yeah.
Okay. So does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
Did you look at synthetic slate?
Yes.
And
And it's fabulously expensive. It's
like, throw out a number, like,
like $90,000.
so as much as real slate?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. because it's actually better.
Other questions? Go ahead, go ahead.
Hi. Have you had any actual rain leaking in the home since
Yeah.
that dam? Okay.
Yeah, in fact, we live right on Ridge. If you see, we have a blue tarp that's been up there for about a year and a half as we've been litigating, just because there is a lot of, in fact, my daughter woke up with drips on her face one night. So, but yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about why State Farm initially denied, or why the litigator didn't offer you the full replacement? What I'm getting at is, was it about the nature of your policy, or was it about the nature of the damage itself?
The original State Farm, I feel, because we have the documents, they actually sent us another check a year later saying, oh, we might have missed something or something like that, but it was still another check for $2,000. It wasn't much. And then right before we went to litigate, they sent a check for $8,000 because they sent someone back out to re-examine. So they have two reports. The first report said replace everything that's broken, all new, but I don't think they realized that it was slate. I don't think they really did their homework. And then they came out again, and actually the guy went up on the roof and just walked on it, which if you ever know, you're not supposed to walk on a slate roof. And so, but the litigator, bless her heart, she was just kind of like wanting to make everyone happy. And like, I've never been in a lawsuit, like I've been a juror, but I've never had it. And it was just a really kind of, it became really nasty. Like they were telling them that I was trying to profit off this, and like, I mean, I just don't want my house to leak anymore. And I know we live in a historic district, and I want everyone to like the look of the house and everything, but it was just really weird. And so she awarded us almost just over half of what we were asking for to replace it. And like, I think if we would have gotten the full amount, like, I think, yeah, we would have looked at definitely slate again, or if not, some sort of like comparison that was, but I just, I don't have that kind of cash to put like a $20,000 out of my own pocket onto the roof. So, but yeah, it was really weird. I don't know what the confusion, it was really clear. My lawyer was pretty slick, and he was like, every time they said, well, you don't need a new roof, you can, and they would say, well, why in your initial report did you say we needed a new roof? And so it was just kind of, it was really strange. So I wish I could answer that better, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, the question about the comment about the code requiring you to bring everything up to code if you replace the broken ones. Did the contractor tell you that? I'm not sure what part of the code that is.
It was, yeah, our contractor it was our, is it a adjuster? So the say the guy that came in and did the preliminary investigation before we went to trial.
I saw that report, yes.
Yeah. They're the ones that really dove into the code, finding that if we replaced all the gutters, what would we need to do is, because the way those gutters are affixed, is you need to take up the first 6 or 7 rows of shingle to replace. And if you do that, then you do have to put down, I think, rain and ice code. And so at that point, they said this would be a much more a feasible project to replace with asphalt. And it would just, be a much more worth your money kind of.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
This is just a smaller side question, but I noticed that the dormer has slate on it as well.
On the sides, yeah, and that will be replaced with kind of matching wood around from the windows. I've talked to, there's a few options on that. I don't think we'll put slate shingles because that won't probably look right, but we'll put wood. And that air conditioner is going to be coming out because, I hate it.
So, just to clarify, so on the side of the dormer there, you're going to replace that with siding?
Yes.
Was that your question?
Yeah, I was just, you didn't mention it, but it would be part of it's kind of roofing, but actually a wall, so I was just curious what
That's
the
a
plan
good
was.
point. I think there's some siding below the windows on the main floor that it's boarded, so I think that's what we would mimic so that it matches the rest of the house.
So I have a question for staff. Kate, do we have to give him, do we have to include the siding as part of our consideration? I mean, because we were only looking at the roof, but if there's siding going on, or can that be a minor, like administrative review?
Yeah, wasn't clear that was part of the proposal either, but you can certainly include that. That's probably something that I would review as staff, because this is a non-contributing property anyway, but we can certainly include that if you have a preference for how that be handled.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions about that or anything else?
I mean,
Cheryl?
if you're matching something else on the house, it would have been good to kind of see that, but
Yeah,
it sounds
I
reasonable.
apologize. Yeah, it's a weird thing that those shingles are there.
Is that the only location where you would take the slate off and not replace it with asphalt?
Yes.
Go ahead, Charles.
The area that's covered by the tarp,
That's, that is actually copper underneath
there's copper underneath that,
that we're going to be replacing with something similar to copper.
so the copper was damaged in the hailstorm.
The hail was as big as my fist. It was huge, and so there were punctures in the copper on the gutters as well. It actually broke that window as well. But I think the leaking is coming from. Do you see? We have the tarp going up on the roof a little bit, and I think so. It's covering some of the holes that were actually put into the copper in the front. And you can actually see, since these pictures were taken, there's wood damage down at the bottom right of that dormer.
Right.
Yeah, that's all because rain has been kind of leaking in through there. But yeah, you can see like they put the tarp up under the one shingle. But that's where the majority of the leaking is happening.
The tile that you located, was any of it, how similar was it to the existing tile?
Well, we have a picture side by side. The asphalt you're
No, the
speaking
tile,
of?
no, you said that you had priced.
Well, slate, we could
Slate, I
find.
mean slate, I'm sorry.
We could find slate just like that,
Yes?
which that's what we were asking for, 120. And then we found some Da Vinci, it's called Da Vinci, and it's a composite slate, and it looks very similar. And that was 132,000.
Did you price replacing broken slate with new slate, since you could find the exact same thing?
Yes.
And how was that?
The contractor said he wouldn't do it because there's just too much work to do. There's too many tiles that would need replacing, and then there's the existing damage of the other damage of the other stuff, the gutters and the downspouts were
And
too
I
extensive.
don't remember, what was the price of the tile alone, separate from all the other adjacent work, like the gutters? Now, do you remember?
The slate?
Yes,
or-
I'm sorry, I keep saying tile.
That's okay.
Slate tile.
No, you know what? I don't know because it was all wrapped up into the State Farm or the contractor's estimate. I don't know what the difference is. I do know that the Belmont that we priced is, I don't know. I know that other than the roof, though, the repairs or the replacement of the gutters is under 10. I think that's what I remember him saying, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question. I assume that if you had an example in person, a physical thing that you could show us, that you would have brought it with you?
Of
Of
a
the-
broken,
No, of the certaintied,
yeah.
the
yes,
product
I
you would like
would've,
to
yes.
use, so you do not have that.
No, it's going to need to be ordered once we get approval, or if we get approval.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant? Okay, Thank you very much. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this? Okay, seeing none, we can close that part of it and just turn to our discussion. I have a question for my fellow commissioners, is if anyone on the commission has experience with this particular type of asphalt shingle, how deep is it, and
I'm pretty sure that we addressed this at 2 meetings ago at 1041 Asbury,
Yeah.
and the gentleman from Hanson Roofing brought a copy with us. I mean, of course, it's always a tragedy to see these beautiful roofs go, but in that case, we did approve. I don't know if it was Belmont, but it was a CertainTeed product that looks very similar to what's in.
We did, and that's why I was asking if there was an example. But in this particular type of asphalt shingle, if anyone has any experience with that. That was my only question. So we are all working off of the expectations that we have based on 2 meetings ago in terms of the,
Well, and the little photo we have there.
right.
Okay. I mean, if, I'll offer my opinion on the photo that I'm seeing there, that it does have a depth of character that I think certainly goes way beyond like a typical 3-tab shingle. It does not look like the sort of ordinary architectural shingles that more mimic a cedar shake. So it does something to try and look more slate-like, and yet I kind of like that it's not trying too hard and getting in kind of a weird kind of faux look. So in this world of imperfection where we're debating whether or not to replace that beautiful slate, if I have to replace it with asphalt, I'm not sure we're going to see anything better than that.
Other comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add similar, that we did see a project that we reviewed, and it was a contributing structure on Asbury. This is a non-contributing, similar product. And I also was a victim of that storm, so we had a roof replacement, so I do understand what it's like working with those insurance companies as well. And roof replacements are expensive. While we don't consider that completely, I do think this is a good, a good alternative maybe to slate.
Other thoughts before we close discussion?
Yeah, I think one of my concerns is just setting the precedent for going ahead with this product, just because I wasn't at that October meeting, and so I didn't recall that. But almost since that was already done, I do agree with what we were saying about that this tile, the CertainTeed tile, I too like that it's not trying to. It's close to slate, but it's not trying to be slate. Like it's enough different. Replacing this roof with the copper elements and the whole system. It doesn't adhere to our standards, and so, but with the standard already, with the precedent already set, that trying to figure out these houses and making them watertight moving forward, to prolong the life of the whole structure, I think it's definitely worth considering.
Yes, I'm not sure that the asphalt shingle that we saw last time was quite this product, but it seems similar. I had one other question for the applicant, sorry. I just wanted to know if you had a plan for the slate tiles when they come off the roof.
I've just left that to the contractor. He'll be eliminating of them or recycling ones that might still work. So, but yeah, most of them are not usable probably. So,
well, we do have Evanston Rebuilding, our rebuilding warehouse here. So we are trying as a commission to promote the reuse of these materials rather than the treating them as debris.
okay, well, I can definitely bring that up to him and make sure that if that's something that they can just move over to there.
And one other thing you might consider is keeping a small stack in the basement or the attic for future homeowners if they ever want to return to a slate roof. If you know, a windfall comes and they're able to do that and they'd like to
We
go
actually
back.
do have a small stack in the basement from when the house was probably built, so.
Oh, get
yeah,
out.
Yeah.
You don't have more?
Yeah, right, yeah, no, about
Okay.
7. So,
Okay,
but
great.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing, and
Yeah.
it does actually come in handy in the future. I'm sure that staff can provide you with more information about Rebuilding
Okay, yeah,
Warehouse
I'll
and
reach out
just,
to you.
and we also had the executive director of Rebuilding Warehouse here a few months ago, and she did a whole presentation on what her organization can provide, the support that they provide to building owners, so you can watch that on YouTube.
That's great. Was that the place on Dempster at one time?
It's Rebuilding
It's off of
Exchange
Dempster.
now.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
It's Rebuilding Exchange.
Rebuilding Exchange, thank you. I knew that it changed the name, thank you. All right, that was my only question, thank you. I think that it seems to me that we have discussed this enough, but if anybody else has any remaining comments,
Would it be of any interest to restore the copper on that dormer? Just throw it out there, you know, I mean, it's an element that's probably pretty important, but maybe only to me.
And there's just the one dormer on the front? Yeah.
Can we see the photo of the dormer?
I'm so sorry, if you want, yeah, just for the recording, it has to be on the microphone.
It currently has a blue tarp. It's the original copper dormer, so it's pretty much like really dark. It's not, but
Is it a barrel vault? I can't quite.
it's a barrel, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that's something I haven't talked to the contractor. I don't know if they're planning on replacing it with copper or not, so.
I'm not sure that they could, just technically, I'm not sure that they could use shingles because the top of it
No.
is so low slope. So it's probably got to be something other than shingles. So that's a really interesting idea and relatively affordable considering
Yeah.
what it could
Yeah.
be. And it certainly has an impact on the facade. So that's an interesting idea.
When the current material gets removed from that part of it, that can be recycled also potentially.
The copper? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
So then, Cade, follow-up question to that is, do we need to consider what is going to happen on that? Or can we send that for administrative review also? What's the,
I would ask that if you have strong opinions about it, that you include that in your motion. If I were to review this, I would probably not require him to replace that in kind just because it's a non-contributing building.
okay.
I guess
Did everyone understand what he just said? The
Yeah, I
new
guess
commissioners?
the follow-up question is, it seems like it's either going to be a membrane, like, TPO or modified bitumen, or it's going to be metal. I mean, is there?
So, sorry, if you're speaking, if you could come up to the microphone so that it can be recorded.
Just pull up a chair.
Casual. I do remember, I know, I've never heard the word bitumen before, so, did I say that right? So that rings a bell.
Okay.
If it comes to it, I think I'd be happy to look at putting copper back up on the dormer, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
So relative to that discussion, then we would probably have to think about what the flashing and the gutters and downspouts are going to be then. I don't know that I really want to mix and match then at that point. I'm assuming that it's aluminum gutters and
No, it's copper.
You're
gutters,
going to
right?
replace them with, okay,
No, we're not replacing them with copper, but they're copper now, but they're painted,
okay.
and so, yeah, I know.
And they're going to remain?
No.
Okay, so they're going to be
They'll-
replaced,
Yes, you're right, aluminum.
okay.
This,
Okay.
just to be clear, So they are copper now, but they are going to be replaced with aluminum.
Yes.
Okay.
So does it, John, I think that's where you're going, that it wouldn't make sense to have copper and then white aluminum everywhere else.
And then there's the potential for galvanic reaction between the two materials. I'm not sure where the mixing the aluminum with the copper. So I don't know. That's a tough call. I want to talk a little bit about the general impressions of the slate roof replacement and
Thank you.
probably more from a precedent point of view for this board. We had a similar case to this about a year ago. It was even a kind of a more unique, I don't think it was slate, I think it was a colored terracotta.
It was the, do you guys remember the one, people that have been here for a while? It was a kind of Mexican type interlocking tile, yeah. Go
So
ahead, John.
I'm just gonna walk you through my impressions of this, because when I first looked at the photos, I thought, well, most of this slate looks good, and I had some real concern. Why should we grant this replacement? And that's why I was kind of asking a lot about the condition of the roof and who said what and why was it denied and things like that. And as I kind of worked through the process, I did realize that a significant number of them are broken. He's got leaking already. It's very old and very brittle. He's got to replace the gutters and the downspouts. That is going to require him to peel up a significant portion of them, as the owner said. When you add all that together and you think about when you talk to a contractor about, oh, hey, can you do like replace 60% of this roof and leave the 40% and give me like a price that's better than like replacing it all in slate in the first place? And it never, ever works that way. And so it seemed just like the one that I mentioned from about a year ago, the terracotta roof. I'm always heartbroken about it, but when I put myself in the shoes of the homeowner and what they're faced with and the cost of the replacement that we'd like to see, it just seems like an undue burden that we would be putting on people. And so from a precedent point of view, that's kind of how I see this case.
I was there this afternoon. I was for the second time. That dormer that comes out and the roof under the tarp is just so prominent that it has the potential to not come off real well. I don't know, and maybe I'm new at this, so you have to bear with me here for a second. What the impression, what the drive-by, what the look is, and maybe there's some other kind of treatment other than just smooth black surface on top of that. It just seems not right somehow.
You could do like a metal roof, right? A curved colored metal roof. I don't know much about this honestly, but I know we have a metal roof over our porch. Comes in many colors. It's not as expensive as copper. I don't know, you just asked what other, I don't know what the options are beyond that. That's the extent of my knowledge on roofs.
Can I ask the homeowner one more question? So we don't often get into the costs of things, but in this case, you're replacing a material we don't want you to replace, and so we're thinking about this from a hardship point of view. When the dust settles on the lawsuits and what the lawyers get paid and what you're going to have to pay for the asphalt shingle, are you evening out? If we said, well, we're going to grant you the asphalt shingle that you've proposed, but we want you to add that dormer copper, is there anything left in your settlement?
No, we're already like over 12 grand out of pocket at this point
if you replace it with the asphalt and the okay. Thank you.
Question for those of you on the commission that have some technical knowledge of bitumen roofs, can those be done in different colors? We have one that's white, not black. Can they be done in green?
I would steer away from trying to do, just like you said with the slate tile, that it is not, it goes far enough to look like slate, but it's not that faux look, and I wouldn't try to have a patina copper color when it's not that material, because it's already a different material. The bitumen is a different, it's not going to come, a texture is not going to come across as like, patina copper, so maybe just a dark neutral color would be better.
Yeah, I was just trying to find a compromise.
You can get a gray granular kind of
Yeah, that's
finish.
what
I
we
don't
have.
know if it's on a modified bid or if it's TPO or which kind of a membrane roof you can do that on, but there are some you can do that too.
Yeah, we have, that's the kind of thing that we've got. It's, in other words, the bitumen can come in something other than black, but that's what you always see it in.
I think, as I understand it, the copper, sorry, one more question for you. There's copper at the top of the ridge line, at the very top of the roof, and then in the valleys, right, where the two parts of the roof meet. And so I imagine that when you go in with the asphalt, then there'll be a brand new detail without copper in any of those locations, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That answers that. So then, just for the commissioners, my thought then about the copper feature, like, if there's just no more copper, then I'm all right then with the dormer, with an administrative review of roofing the dormer again with some sort of a painted metal roof that then would match the gutters and downspouts as well, or at least just complement one another somehow. Yeah, there's a lot of copper that'll be missing after this, but I mean, it's kind of just like, as you were saying, like, it's just so many factors that are coming into this, replacing the materials, so. It's kind of like we're getting rid of all the other copper as well on the peaks and the valleys, so I don't know. It's going to be a different top to the house.
From a precedent-setting sort of, how the commission wants to look at this going forward. So I did take a look. Grand Manor was the one that we used at Asbury, which also is a CertainTeed product. Some folks say that the Grand Manor is a little bit better. I mean, is there any utility in having sort of, a through line here where folks can be like, okay, under this, situation, this is what we would want them to use. I mean, he could come to us and say, hey, if we just want to use an architectural shingle, is having some sort of precedent and just sort of, useful? Is that something we've done in the past? Does anybody know? Or is because of, the fact that, CertainTeed is a product and, ostensibly they might go out of business or they might change the product. Is there not a utility in creating some sort of product replacement precedent, if you will?
I personally would rather have it be case by case, based on what we see and what's possible, but that's my personal preference.
I think I would say to answer that you're never setting a precedent, right? You're reacting to what's proposed. Preservation and design review is inherently a process. That's what makes it different than applying the zoning code or applying the building code. So you are reviewing each individual property for its own individuality, its own design vocabulary, and how it speaks both to itself and its surroundings. So I don't think that you created a precedent the last time. I don't think you would create a precedent this time either.
And to that end, thanks for reminding us, Kay, this home is non-contributing to the district.
Although we have in the past treated non-contributing as, sort of the same, but anyway.
I would like to make one quick comment on the issue of whether or not the sides of the dormers, how we feel about that. And yes, in slate, it's lovely. In asphalt shingles, kind of trying to look like slate, I don't think it will be nearly as effective as it is when it's on the roof itself. And so I welcome a wood siding solution and would leave that up to staff review on that.
One thing we could do is actually say that in the motion. So the motion would talk about the asphalt shingles and also something about the side of the dormer that would welcome this, the wood siding as opposed to replacing the slate with asphalt shingles in that location. And then I think we talked about the roof of the dormer and what we're comfortable with staff approving administratively. If we want to, we do not have to, right, Cade, we don't have to specify anything in the motion about that, the roof of the dormer, if we don't want to. But if we have strong feelings, we can do that. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but we cannot strictly comment on the color of that material, just the
Right.
material itself.
Right. Does anyone else have any comments before we move to trying to craft a motion? Okay, seeing none, does anyone want to take a shot at this? John, you want to try?
Yes, but can you, so there's the condition, I'm going to make it conditional on the sides of the dormers be in a wood material, subject to staff review, and that also conditional on finding the most compatible matching membrane material for the round dormer. Is that right? And then was there a third condition that had to do with the asphalt shingles that I thought?
No, the
Okay.
asphalt shingles are the.
That's the main-
That's the main.
Okay.
C of A.
Okay.
Is everyone on board with this approach? Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay.
Just one quick clarification. Are you saying that we are preferring a membrane material for the barrel vault for the dormer roof? Or is metal fine if that's what they want to go
Well,
back
we
with?
welcome a metal solution, and I would also leave that up to, it can't just be a piece of flat stock. It's going to have like a seam or something like that, and we would love it if you did something like that. Okay, I'll take a crack at it. All right, regarding case 23, Pres-0193, 927 Ridge Avenue, Ridge Historic District, I move that we offer approve a certificate of appropriateness to alter the structure's roofing material, replace original slate tiles with asphalt shingles. The Preservation Commission is the determining body per code section 2-8-8. This approval conditional on the sides of the front dormer being replaced in a wood siding material, subject to staff review, as well as a request that the top of the dormer be in as compatible material, be it metal with a seam or a membrane roof, also subject to staff approval.
All right, thank you. Is there a second? Tom?
Second?
Second.
Okay, it's been second. All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? Anyone abstain? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Good luck with your project. Moving on to the next order of business, the approval of meeting minutes, the minutes of October of 10 meeting. Did anyone have any comments on that? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. It's automatically approved in that case. Item number 5, staff reports, October newsletter engagement summary. Does staff want to tell us really quick about the newsletter?
Playing musical chairs. I don't have too much to offer that wasn't in the memo. I think the interesting things of note are that the newsletters are well read, almost by 1,000 people. We've also seen for the first time in maybe the last couple of years an increase in the number of subscribers, which is excellent. And that was it was over 100 people, I think, from the first one to this one. And the number of total opens and reads has increased as well, which is really excellent. The one thing that doesn't seem to really, maybe we need to find a different way, I think I put it in the memo to communicate this, is the way that people kind of digest the presentations in the speaker series we've had. They do not seem interested in either case in watching the YouTube video. And so I think having the video as an option if somebody would like to, but also maybe there's a quick summary or a one-pager that they can click on to more easily digest that information, because I think it's been great information. So I think keep it up. I did have the schedule in there. We have 2 more. A few columns have become somewhat regular just over the last 2 times, but certainly entertain any interest someone has in writing something new.
I just wanted to add that I was pretty impressed how many people clicked on the Preserve 2040 plan. That's a pretty nice number, and so I would like to try to find a way to keep reminding people that the Preserve 2040 plan exists and that we're trying to just not have it be a thing like a set of ideas, but actually it's actionable. Are you moving? Oh, you're moving over again. Anyway, did anyone else have any thoughts on the newsletter?
Good work, everyone.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's a great addition. It's
Thank
good.
you. Okay, moving on to the discussion items. The first item is this is Section 6, discussion of vote will be taken. The Preservation Ordinance Review. You're being pulled up now.
Does anyone need a quick break before we dive into this?
So that's the reason why I paused. Does anyone want to take a break? We don't usually take a break at this point, but we could. You want to just keep going? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I think this is a wonderful opportunity, especially because we have many new commissioners. I wanted to provide a general overview of the preservation ordinance and the commission itself, as well as a little bit of background history on the commission, with a focus really on what you're empowered to do as a body. I think one thing that I've always tried to express is that this group has agency. You're empowered to do more than just sit back and wait for cases to review. And not all boards and commissions operate like that, so that's somewhat unique. You're empowered to have a really robust subcommittee structure, working group structure. You're empowered to have volunteers help you. These are all things that other groups don't have, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that. And I should say that this is intended to somewhat be a training, and there's a lot of text in here that I won't go over, but this is something that I intend to deliver to new commissioners as well as use as a training for elected officials, department heads. That's a priority in the Preserve 2040 plan to try to advance. So the first thing I want to talk about, and for those of you that saw Bonnie McDonald's presentation, preservation is multifaceted. So preservation is not what it was initially and just reviewing kind of high style architectural resources. That's certainly part of it, and that's an important part of it. But at its basic level, historic preservation is a conversation with our past about our future, and I like that. That comes from the National Trust, I believe. Preservation is also significantly valuable. It's a very important tool. For my purposes as a city planner, it's an extremely powerful planning and land use tool. What preservation really does for me, and in terms of land use, is that it allows you to retain and more actively manage built environments that already meet our land use goals and objectives in a better way than our code allows new construction to do. And so retaining that is really critical. We're talking about human-centered places that are difficult to build nowadays. Historic preservation is also a steward of collective memory and community identity. People have really significant attachments to place and to buildings, and there's psychological impacts to that. They feel more comfortable in these places. And that's something that preservation does, and something this commission does, is that you are the steward of those resources that this community up to this point has identified as being significant as part of their identity. Preservation is a contributor to community health and well-being. This is really, you could unpack this in a whole separate presentation. There's so much to this. There's psychological benefits to traditional architecture and rich and varied compositions. People feel more comfortable in traditionally designed spaces. Some of that has to do with the fractal geometry of traditional and classical architecture that somewhat mimics nature in a lot of ways. Preservation is inherent to sustainability. Part of what we do here is you actively manage and try to retain the embodied energy and the significance of materials that are really irreplaceable today. Preservation is a powerful economic development tool. This is something that's really underutilized in this community, but other communities really take this to heart. That preservation and economic development are intimately tied through the creation of unique identities. So what is Evanston? Well, Evanston is this collection of its built environment. And for lack of a better term, in a very capitalistic society, you can market that. That is Evanston's brand that you can capitalize on. And I think that that's a very important tool. And then really quickly, preservation manages change. It doesn't stop it. So none of this is intended to kind of encase the city of Evanston in amber and never let anyone change it. What you're doing is just actively managing built environments that really meet the goals and objectives that we've already set in a very meaningful way. I mean, I touched on this a little bit, but preservation is really a process. It's a process where the community determines what elements of its past it wants to carry with it as part of its future. And those conversations are changing, and they're dynamic, and it's evolving, and things that people find significant now are very different from what they would have found significant 20, 30 years ago. I really won't touch on this much, but it's something that comes up not infrequently, more in my conversations in day-to-day, but how is this legal, basically? So the basis of preservation, and this is really rooted in very robust case law, and it's been litigated at the highest level in this country. And interestingly enough, the same process that empowers urban renewal in this country is what also empowers preservation of spaces, that cities have a right to be beautiful and maintain those environments. So that's rooted in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. What you're doing as a commission, particularly when you exercise a design review, is you're exercising the division of police power. And that's important. It means that your decisions shouldn't be arbitrary. That's why they're grounded in a set of common standards, and standards that are really applied across municipalities nationwide. Because you have to provide due process as well under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. That's what this commission does when you have someone come and present to you and you have a set of standards that they have to meet. Because the federal government doesn't retain this power for themselves, the state of Illinois is able to empower municipalities through its Zoning Enabling Act to conduct preservation efforts. And then the city of Evanston has taken that on through its preservation ordinance. And then we also have many guiding and adopted policy documents, including the comprehensive plan and somewhat recently our Preserve 2040 plan. So this is kind of the legal framework for this body. This I won't touch on much either, but as I talked about, preservation has evolved significantly. So even though some of the root causes of preservation are very similar, even from the 1850s to today, it's that there's inherent value in land, and that value is increasing, and people want to capture that value, and that conflicts with people's desire to retain places that are significant to their identity. That was really the root of both the Hasbrook House and Mount Vernon, both connected with George Washington, as well as very early efforts to preserve the New Orleans French Quarter, or Charleston, South Carolina, which really had the very first district approach and preservation ordinance, I think. And really, we've evolved significantly, too, just in the past 2 decades, where we've moved from really a focus on high-style architectural resources to now preservation is very diverse. It's about people, it's about stories, it's about businesses, things that I always call living heritage. And then one is that despite this, preservation is really clouded in myth and misconception, and one of those is that you deny everything, that no one can do anything. And that's something we tried to create more transparency through our annual report, but typically this body approves about 90 to 95% of the cases that come before it, whether that be with conditions or just straightforward approvals. Some of these events here, early examples, these were kind of one-offs, right? So how did preservation become a national movement? Well, there's some really key events to this. One is the Housing and Urban Development VA Home Loan Program. It's really the rise of single-family homes, the rise of suburbia after World War II. Also the white flight, and here the Housing Act authorizing some clearance in urban development in the 40s. Construction of the interstate highway system. Really what I've always referred to as the decline of American urbanization is this period of time where communities really saw their built fabric ripped apart in a short amount of time. And that was traumatic. That was traumatic for a lot of people. And this kind of came to a head and really galvanized the largest city in the country with demolition of Penn Station. That's kind of one of the key moments that make this a nationwide movement. But this happened all over the country. These things that happen in large cities in Chicago and New York, they happened everywhere, and they even happened in Evanston and spurred some of our local movement here. So what are some of those movements in Evanston? Removal of the city streetcar system, that happened in the 1930s. Construction of I-94 and the rise of suburbia around Evanston. This is huge, really. This and construction of Old Orchard impacted Evanston in a very profound way. And these are really dramatic changes in retail and market conditions that Main Street America was not able to compete with at that time. And so what you saw was Main Street America try to reinvent itself. And it tried to reimagine itself as a suburban shopping mall. And what did that entail? What it entailed demolition of a lot of structures. It needed parking. It needed off-street parking. What I always call this idea of off-street parking as a right comes out of this movement. And then also in our residential districts in Evanston, you saw subdivision of very large, prominent estates. This happened both in the Lakeshore District and the Ridge Historic District, more in the Ridge Historic District. And this happened in a short amount of time, really aligned with the nationwide movement in the 60s and 70s. I love this aerial photo of downtown Evanston in the 1930s. These are really the human scale fabric, the smallness, the rhythm of the individual parcels. It's really substantial. And you look at these photos, this portion of North Davis Street. There's nothing in this photo that exists anymore except for the North Shore Hotel on the far right of that photo. Here's another shot of that. This is Fountain Square. That's the State Bank and Trust Company on Davis and Sherman. That's the original YMCA next to it, and the Rood building in the center, which was really the prominent feature of downtown Evanston. Another shot of the State Bank and Trust building. This is Evanston's Carnegie Library. Many communities were We're blessed to have Carnegie Libraries. Many still have them. Unfortunately, we do not have ours. That was also located downtown, I think, on Sherman. I don't know the exact location. This photo looking south on Sherman and Orienton, you see the streetcar system, the brick streets, the Valencia Theater in the background. Nothing on the right-hand side of this photo exists anymore.
That's where the Rotary is, right?
The original City Hall on the left here, the Rood Building. Downtown Evanston at a time was extremely prominent as a retail destination, a shopping destination. It really rivaled at the time Peoria, which is known for having that really strong commercial presence downstate. But outside of Chicago, up north, it was really Evanston.
The rounded top on that building over there, was that the City Hall?
Yes, on the left.
Isn't that in the backyard of the house on Crane and Asbury?
There is a story. Yeah, I've never been able to confirm that,
Jack
but there is
Wing's
a
house?
story.
It's,
Yeah, yeah.
I think it is.
This was Evanston's second city hall, which was formerly the Evanston Country Club, which was demolished shortly after the city occupied it. This is now the location of the Merrick Rose Garden. Here's another aerial shot of downtown Evanston. All these buildings were demolished in a period of about 20 to 30 years. And this really just galvanized the spirit in many ways. This is why this body exists. And then looking forward up to the year 2000, this is a shot of downtown. Really, the downtown is kind of bounded by Emerson Street to the north, Ridge to the west, Chicago Avenue to the east, and Lake Street to the south. Everything in yellow had been demolished in between a time between 1940 and 2000, so in six decades. And it wasn't really exclusive to the downtown. Here's a shot of Central Street. That portion on the right, that entire block is now a parking lot and a small bank building. This photo is a little confusing because it's actually inverted. One was the Lincoln School, which was really one of the crown jewels of the district for a long time, which was somewhat needlessly demolished in the heart of the Lakeshore Historic District. And then more recent examples and more vernacular and cultural examples. These are both associated very strongly with the Butler Livery Corporation, who's a very prominent black entrepreneur. And these resources were demolished much more recently. So this one at 914 Davis, demolished for a planned development, which is now a multifamily building, I think in the 1990s, early 2000s. And this one, which was part of the Research Park District, was also demolished. It is now a parking lot. This building as well was nominated for landmark designation on Hinman. This was designed by John August Neidens, very eclectic colonial revival building, which was denied landmark status. It was subsequently demolished. It's been a vacant lot since. And these are not just to say that these should be retained because they're beautiful buildings, but they contribute in many, many other ways. So we talk about a housing shortage to allow a piece of housing to just be demolished for a vacant lot. And more recent in people's memory, the Harley Clark Mansion. So why?
Kate, sorry, I just
Yeah,
have a
go
quick
ahead.
question regarding demolishing, because we do a lot of like alterations, additions, and some new builds, but we don't ever, I guess I'm unclear what this commission does relative to like, can something be demoed or not? Is that, how does
Yeah,
that
well,
work?
and we'll get into that more. There's a whole section kind of on the powers and responsibilities, and some of them they're not really exercised fully. But really, the organization and purpose. What is the purpose of the preservation ordinance? Well, really, what its purpose is it creates the preservation program, and it establishes you as the commission to administer that program. You're somewhat unique in that this commission is really solely responsible for that program. Staff does some heavy lifting behind the scenes, but you guys kind of pull the strings in many ways, and we'll talk about that as well. It establishes the commission's powers and duties. It provides procedures and standards associated with survey and documentation. This one kind of answers your questions maybe, but the ordinance is intended to provide a check on development pressure and opportunities for cultural and historic considerations to be part of our entitlement and development processes, especially for non-as-of-right proposals. We afford due process to applicants, and we also provide processes for special considerations, so that'd be appeals, certificates of special merit, certificates of economic hardship. The ordinance also outlines penalties and enforcement procedures when the law is not followed, even though that is a responsibility of staff, not a responsibility of this commission.
Excuse me, Kate. Can you talk about what is the as-of-right proposal? What is an as-of-right proposal?
So it's anything that you're not asking. Basically, it means you're not asking for a special use. You're not asking for any variances from the zoning code or building code. You're not triggering a plan development. Those are really the biggest scenarios. So you were just following the letter of the law without requesting anything beyond that. And this here, really the purpose of the ordinance, what it says is to promote the educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the city. That is almost regurgitated from the state's enabling legislation. So it ties back to that legal authority. The preservation program has 9 goals and objectives. Only one of those explicitly supports binding design review activities, even though that's become really the bulk of the commission's work since you received that power in the mid-1990s. The other remaining 8 goals and objectives, I didn't list them out word for word, but they talk about preservation-based economic development and heritage tourism, identification, celebration, and registration of historic and cultural heritage, in addition to architectural heritage. They encourage providing guidance and education on the value of adapted use, rehabilitation of resources that already exist and contribute to our land use goals, fostering civic pride in our built environment, and maintaining ongoing education and advocacy efforts. Neighborhood stabilization programs, there's actually one of the goals and objectives really speaks very strongly to this concept of conservation districts, even though it doesn't explicitly say it. Encouraging future development that considers the value of retaining irreplaceable built fabric, and ongoing survey and documentation. Oh, and this is also critical. The other one is maintaining an ongoing survey and study list of eligible resources.
Is there any nexus between our ordinance and what we're allowed to do and other kinds of other city bodies
Yeah.
that, for example, if I was I owned a piece of property and I purposely chose to let it fall into disrepair with probably the goal of eventually demolishing it or changing it significantly, is there a way that the commission could be involved in stopping that kind of?
Yeah, we'll touch on that too. Many municipalities would have what's called demolition by neglect provisions. We don't have demolition by neglect provisions. We have a relatively robust property standards code, which they're somewhat similar. So someone in theory is not allowed legally to allow the property to just fall into disrepair under that code. But there are remedies that the commission has if they see issues with that, and we can talk about that. So what did all this kind of result in, that early effort of the commission? Well, it's really a significant story, and I know I've told almost every single one of you up here, but we have 850 local landmarks. 430 of those are outside of a district. We have 4 local historic districts, 4 National Register historic districts, 3 National Historic Landmarks. That's really the highest level of national recognition in this country. And more recently, we have 8 African American heritage sites, which are primarily facilitated through the Shorefront, which is a partner organization, but we did adopt a resolution to recognize those resources. The structure and responsibilities of the commission, as we talked about, you have exclusive purview over the preservation program. You're entrusted with safeguarding the city's historic, cultural, archaeological, and architectural heritage. The early commission was really envisioned as an advisory and working body, and it was extremely active in both survey and documentation, as well as education and advocacy. Binding design review responsibilities were codified in the mid-1990s, but you are broadly empowered beyond those responsibilities. And you can somewhat control what that looks like, what kind of cases come before this commission. Really quick, the composition, I don't want to touch on this too much, but there's 11 of you. You are empowered to have a robust subcommittee and working group structure. You can have associate members and volunteers to advance your work. The commission also has many ex officio members who could attend meetings. I don't know that this has really been exercised recently, but they're technically a member of city council can be a member of this body, community development director. I think there's some others as well, economic development manager, I think. You have me as your staff member who acts as the liaison between this commission, the city council, and also the corporation or the city. So if you want to recommend things, ask certain questions, that should happen through me, and I'm kind of the intermediary between those. This one I touched on too, but most importantly to me, the commission is powerful. You have agency. You can act independently. You can set your own agendas. You can control what types of projects you review. And you can and should conduct your own business within the bounds of the ordinance. It's intended that way. The commission this is really miraculous. You're afforded 30 powers and duties. Just for kind of reference, the Land Use Commission I think has 5 or 6 powers and duties. There's so many that I didn't want to list them, but they can really be summed into 4 broad categories. So powers and duties related to survey and documentation, education and advocacy, resource management, and program administration. I was always taught that these are kind of the 4 legs of an effective preservation program. If you think of preservation as a stool, these are the 4 legs. And then of note, it's very ambiguous, but the last power the commission has is really to undertake any action necessary or appropriate in advancement of the purpose and goals of this ordinance. I think that intends that there's often ambiguity. There's situations that demand this commission take certain action that isn't expressly given to itself, as long as it advances one of those 9 goals and objectives. And then also, I was always taught that you read ordinances so that they make sense. That's really the first rule. And so you want to interpret your powers and duties liberally in advancement of the goals and objectives of the ordinance, as well as your companion policy documents. That includes the comprehensive plan and also Preserve 2040. So what is survey and documentation? This is really critical. It forms the foundation of effective community preservation planning. This allows you to understand what resources exist in your community and assess their significance and their importance. These really include 5 different things. One is just periodically resurveying existing districts and landmarks. The rule of thumb I was always taught is every 10 years or so, but it's more realistic, probably do that every 20 years. I think the Ridge Historic District is our oldest. It was last done in the mid-1980s, so that's kind of a pressing issue at this point. It should be resurveyed. Undertaking reconnaissance or intensive level surveys. Reconnaissance surveys can be drive-by windshield surveys. They can be walking surveys. Intensive level surveys involve much more background research on individual properties. This also includes nomination and recommendation for registration of resources as landmarks and districts. This one's very critical, ongoing identification of eligible resources and maintaining a list of eligible resources proposed for future designation. And this one, conferring recognition for historic preservation efforts by way of awards, plaques, or markers. This is a power and duty that I think can be interpreted to advance some of this body's desire to register and celebrate more cultural and social resources.
You mentioned the Butler Building. When the Butler Building was torn down, they retained the cornerstone. Mm-hmm. And the cornerstone was supposed to have been placed back in a similar location in the research park. I think I know where that cornerstone is. Anyway, would that be the kind of thing that would be in our purview to undertake, to say we'd like to have that item followed through on?
Yeah, sure. There's examples, some of that, and we'll get into it, but especially if these are situations where you've identified eligible resources and you're proposing these for future nomination by way of making that study list, it allows you to insert yourself in plan development conversations, major variation conversations for those resources where you are essentially providing a space for the residents to say, is this significant, is it not significant? And what you're trying to do is answer a question that I think is very difficult for the Land Use Commission to answer, which is a standard they have that asks, will this be detrimental to historic resources? And I think this body is much better, served to answer those questions than they are. And we'll get into that too. Just quickly, the nomination criteria and procedure. You are a recommending body for nominations. So to be perfectly clear, the City Council determines what becomes a landmark, what becomes a district. You can be very powerful in your ability to influence that by the way of your recommendation or writing your report. This commission can stop that process if they believe that it doesn't meet any of the eligibility criteria. It doesn't advance beyond this commission. You're also not mandated to make a recommendation. Sometimes nomination proceedings can be highly politicized. And there might be a circumstance where the commission might hold a public hearing and decline to make a recommendation for or against. Once that 70-day period clocks out, the nomination just ends. So there's and we'll talk about that, but we don't have formal demolition delay. We don't require owner consent, which is a good thing. Nominations are afforded interim protections. That means if somebody nominates something, the law recognizes that as it's already been designated, that it's already a landmark until the proceedings work their way through. The nomination process itself has a built-in form of demolition delay, and the application and nomination process is really intentionally a two-part process. The first step and really the only requirement to initiate these interim protections are that someone fill out a form, a one-page form, that they intend to nominate something. Then the commission has a requirement to hold a public hearing within 90 days, but that individual could spend that time developing that report. And that's intentional. That's to try to protect resources where their demolition is imminent.
Kate, sorry, so you have to be a landmark to be protected in this Evanston landmark, but not in a historic district. Like you're saying, if there's going to be a demolition, you can kind of put a stay on it while they're nominated to be a landmark. Is that what you're saying?
So as soon as somebody nominates something, they fill out that one-page form, they pay the $100 nomination fee. It starts the process, which includes providing interim protections for that resource. So the law views that resource until the commission or city council denies the nomination. It views it as a landmark. So they would be required, if they propose demolition after the fact, they can request that, but they would have to come before the commission and meet the standards for demolition.
But there's no protections for properties in historic districts that are not landmarks.
No, there are. Yeah, so we
Hinman-
don't differentiate between, our code doesn't actually differentiate between non-contributing and contributing landmark or district.
Okay, but you mentioned a Hinman property was torn down. Was that predating?
It was not in a district.
Oh, it wasn't? I
No,
was thinking it was
outside of the Lake Shore
District.
District. It was nominated individually and torn down after the fact.
Okay.
Yep. And then, like I said, after the 90 days to hold the public hearing, you can also continue that public hearing. There's no limits to that, but you have to provide due process to the applicant, so you can't just in perpetuity continue the public hearing process to try to delay it. And then after the close of the public record, you have 70 days to make a recommendation or not make a recommendation.
This is just, what was for Harley Clark, was there ever a motion in the recent past and the activity around that about it being landmarked and protected?
So it is a landmark. That's why it came before the Preservation Commission when the city proposed to demolish it. And I believe the commission unanimously rejected that demolition. And then we'll get, I could touch on that now because the city, I think that decision was appealed And so the appeal process, when someone appeals a decision of this commission, it's not a political process, and they're not reinvestigating the standards. What they are bound to is to review the record that happened at this commission and the findings of this commission. And so they can't just say, we actually think it would be fine. They have to find that there were missteps taken at this commission, that the decisions that were made were arbitrary, that they were capricious, or there's some ambiguity in the standards or the code that was applied by this body that they could clarify later. So they did not even uptake that appeal because the findings of fact of this body were so strong in that instance.
Okay, when the commission makes a recommendation for landmark and city council then votes down that recommendation, is it true that that recommendation for a landmark is kind of like that a future property owner could not apply for landmark designation again?
The way that I interpret
Thinking of the church on Heard in.
the way I interpret the code is it says that you can't reconsider a nomination for a period of 2 years, and then you can only reconsider it after that period of 2 years if there's substantial new information, I think is what it says. I think that can be interpreted somewhat liberally. I would say if there was a new owner who wanted to designate it, that would be substantially different information than occurred previously. But yes, that is what it says.
That church was over 2 years ago.
And it does have a new owner who might be
Just saying.
sympathetic to. This, I think, is really something I want to point out too, and I've kind of touched on it. But the nomination process, it can be initiated by any resident of Evanston, or actually any resident or any property owner, whether they live here or not. And then this, combined with no owner consent provision, provides a unique process for the community at large to freely identify and nominate the resources that are intimately tied with individual neighborhood or community identities. There's also the ability for this to provide opportunities for what's called weaponization of the ordinance and preservation, which can be really damaging for a preservation program, where it becomes reduced to kind of a partisan tool rather than a celebration of our collective spirit and sense of place. And I think it's just incumbent of this body to remain objective in those situations and not get caught in the politics, that you have a clear set of standards, a clear set of criteria to follow. And if you follow those in the codified process, then everything is fine.
Kate, I have a question about the procedure, the nomination procedure,
Yeah.
so that we're all aware. The nominations do not have to come from commissioners. It can
Correct.
come from anyone.
Anybody?
But commissioners could nominate. Is that correct? They
Yeah,
have not.
it's my understanding that the commission hasn't done that in, maybe since the 1980s. I'm not sure. At one point in time, that was the primary way that things got registered in this community, and it's my understanding that there was so much support for preservation. It was having a moment very akin to sustainability now, where they would hand a list of properties they wanted to designate, and they would get designated, and that's why we have 850 landmarks in so many historic districts. It's a really tremendous story. But this commission the commission as a whole could nominate something. An individual commissioner could also nominate something.
Right, so we do not have to be reactionary.
The other, and we'll get in it too, is that the nomination process is you're very powerful in that process too, in that you can create individualized design guidelines and review standards for resources. So you could nominate something and then say that this is more of a cultural designation where we're only going to review demolition in the future for this resource. We don't need to review alterations for it. As we talked about, the early commission was really active in education and advocacy. This is really most effective if it's not done in isolation, if we kind of establish and nurture relationships with our partner organizations. Those include, we're lucky that we have so many, but, the Preservation League, Shorefront, Francis Willard House, Mitchell Museum, Northwestern, Evanston History Center. All of these have interconnected but somewhat divergent missions and approaches that would probably be better served if there was some kind of common common ground or common space where they could, the meeting of the minds for these individuals. Your powers and duties related to this are to provide technical assistance to residents and applicants. That's something that we do both here at the dais, and we also do that in kind of smaller working groups, or staff also provides that service. This one says assist residents in nominating properties to a local and national register. What the code actually says is assist property owners. It's very clear in that. I think it's intending the commission to only assist an individual in the nomination process if that individual is the property owner and is not objecting to it. To inform residents of Evanston about the power of preservation through publications, including newsletters, maps, brochures, walking tours, and also to sponsor and take part in seminars and other educational programs. And this is really critical to just maintaining stakeholder support and participation. And there's many objectives in Preserve 2040 that want to expand this aspect of the ordinance and the power of the commission.
So I can't help myself, but I'm going to pop in and just remind everybody, we have a subcommittee that's education and advocacy. If you're interested, please join us. We're doing the newsletter, we're doing other things. There's lots more that could be done, tons more.
One of the cooler things that I can find that the early commission did was they were extremely active in the school districts. And they actually had somewhat individualized exercises and kind of curriculums for each grade group that they would go in and present a task to. And there's wonderful coloring books of landmark properties in Evanston that they would take to like kind of pre-K to look at in colors. Really wonderful, all the way up to, go home and write a report on your house, which was something that they might still do that in the schools. But all of that was kind of initiated and conceptualized out of this body in the 70s. Binding resource management, that's really what you just did earlier during this meeting. So the types of work that come before you, they're types of work that first require a permit, types of works that are then visible from the exterior. So we don't review interior, whether the interior is visible from the public way or not. You only review types of work that are visible from a public way. That's defined as a street, an alley, a sidewalk, or other publicly accessible thoroughfare, and not including Lake Michigan. There's some ambiguity in that. Some you would assume many private streets don't count, but actually many of them do if they're not actually preventing the. Yeah, Edgemere Court is one where it's a private road, but basically they have allowed the free passage of the public through there for so many years that is now considered a public way. And if all these criteria are met, then they require a certificate of appropriateness for either demolition, alteration, construction, or relocation. And what's really important is that you as a group, you're empowered to create what are called your own rules of circumstance. So you get to determine out of that group of things that require generally a certificate of appropriateness, which ones you want to come before you and which ones you just want staff to handle that you want to be considered more routine types of work. So you are really empowered to control your own caseload in many ways, and to also critically review types of work that become routine and modify those rules of circumstance over time. One thing that's a holdover from the earlier ordinance that I actually really like is that the commission is mandated to work with property owners to settle differences and come to mutually agreeable solutions that meet the standards. So it's not an adversarial relationship. It's not the commission versus the property owner. It's really working together to find a mutually agreeable solution. I think this body does a really good job at that. This is another one that differs from almost every other board and commission. An applicant must agree to a continuance if it's beyond 45 days from receipt of the application. This probably means in most instances you could continue something once without the applicant saying yes to it, but beyond that they would have to agree to that continuance request.
Kate, I have one more question. If someone disregards what we say or zoning or whatever, and just says, to hell with it, I just want to build what I want to build, like what are the enforcement mechanisms? Like, are there fines? Like what? Like,
Yeah,
does-
there are, so
How does that work?
there are fines and penalties, and those are enforced. There might even be a section coming up about that, but that's done through staff, through the community development community development department. And it's through a process called administrative adjudication. That's the first step. So that's kind of like, it's kind of like parking court. It's like, you come here, you try to find a solution. You can impose fines up to $500 per day from the time of infraction. You can also mandate complete reversal of alterations that weren't approved. And then beyond administrative adjudication, there's always litigation at circuit court if it were to come to that. I think we've only adjudicated one case since I've been here in the last 5 years. The commission may only apply the standards for review when making decisions on issuing certificates of appropriateness. The commission must make written findings of fact when applications are denied. That's because when it's denied, the applicant has a 30-day window to file an appeal. And those findings of fact must be transmitted to the applicant 5 days after the denial. And then that is what the city council would make their decision on. So those findings are very, very critical, very important.
Can I just say something? So is that, in that case, when we're voting no, we say what standard it is
Correct.
that we do not believe has been met?
Mm-hmm.
Just so for future reference, it's, that came up about a year ago, right? Something like that, with a project that was a garage that we denied.
I think he came back.
They came back with additional information, and then we approved it. But it was enough that we denied it, and then we went commissioner by commissioner and said publicly which standards we thought that they had not met, so that we could conform to this particular rule. So I think that I'm reminded of that because I do think that maybe we should get back to, when we vote no, being vocal at that moment about what standards we think are problematic.
And that's why I'll always ask, if someone votes no, I always ask them to talk about the standards. It's difficult to, I always say, talk through the standards. You don't have to always communicate like you're a robot and say, standards 1, 5, and 6 are, not met or something. You can talk through the standards during your deliberation, during your question. You don't have to explicitly call them out necessarily. But if you're going to make a motion to deny something, you need to be very explicit as to why, which standards are not met, and why are they not met.
This is just something as a reminder to those of us who have not gone through that particular situation yet.
And then here, denials, they may be appealed to City Council, who can only make such judgments based on the record and findings of the Commission. Appeals are intended not to be political. They're intended to address improprieties or ambiguity in application of the ordinance. Decisions, let's say that the Commission denies something and the City Council overturns that. That can also be appealed to Circuit Court following that. And I think that there was some very thinly veiled threats that would be the case with the Harley Clark denial as well. That if you were to overturn this, it's not based on the actual findings of the Commission. It's more of a political decision. What are the standards for review? I'll just touch on this briefly. You have 4 separate sets of standards: demolition, relocation, alteration, and construction. Relocation really isn't something we see that frequently anymore, but there are some proposals floating out there for things. One of the buildings on Northwestern in their campus plan, maybe 10 years ago, was proposed for relocation, which was a landmark. They didn't actually move it, but so it can happen. These are modeled after the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And these are really common standards that almost every single municipality across the country uses, and there's a reason for that because they've been litigated. There's case law that supports them. These are the standards that put you on solid legal footing. The Commission, I don't think I've ever seen you do it, but you're also empowered to apply the Secretary of Interior standards in addition to the standards that are referenced more explicitly. If there are aspects of those standards in certain situations that you'd like to apply, you're empowered to do that as well.
So, Kate, I have a couple questions. We have a couple landmarks in the city that are not buildings, that are
Objects.
that are objects and gardens, and the standards seem to be more
Yeah.
trending towards buildings. And because the Secretary of Interior Standards actually has guidelines for landscapes.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like,
You
it
could
seems
apply
like you said,
those.
like you could apply
Sure.
those because our standards are kind of more building centric. So if we had a landmark, if we ever had a landmark landscape come
yeah.
before us, okay.
Yeah, you could think of the Merritt Groves Garden or the Shakespeare Garden. Those are resources that don't really fall under, you're right, that our standards relate much more to, more vertical surfaces even, not even really horizontal surfaces.
There's also guidelines for other types of properties too. There's
Yeah.
cemeteries and there's other.
Yeah, and
there's lots of guidance that we can get from the National Park Service.
The beauty of being able to apply those is that those standards are evolving, they evolve. And so you are just, you're allowed to use them as they evolve. You don't have to use them in the state when it was, the ordinance was adopted. This we touched on a little bit during the meeting, but preservation review is a process. It treats resources with individuality rather than as a commodity. Really zoning in the building code, it treats our built resources as a commodity. It treats them all the same without uniqueness. Preservation is really the opposite of that, and intentionally so. Staff will identify the standards they believe to be applicable, but I do want to stress that any of you may find additional standards that apply, and you can do so at your discretion. So just because I say, standards for alteration 1 through 10 apply, nothing else does, if you think a standard for construction applies, please feel free to say so and say why. When deliberating and questioning applicants and witnesses, the commission should speak through the standards. This is really critical, as I mentioned, for developing those findings of fact. This is just a case review procedure, which most of you are familiar with, or all of you now, but the application is received by us, by staff. The application is then referred to the pre-application review subcommittee. This body, it can defer projects back as an administrative review, but if it doesn't, then the application continues to the commission. And then depending on the type of work, mailed notices are prepared and distributed. So this differs a little bit from other boards and commissions too. Our mailed notices are only for major types of work. I think it calls out only 4 or 5 types of work in the ordinance that receive a mailed notice. It's new construction, it's additions, it's demolition, and there might be one other. So if someone wants to replace their windows or replace the cladding on their home, those don't receive mailed notices. I think the idea behind that is that those do not have a direct impact on neighboring properties in the same way. So that's a conversation between the commission and that property owner, where new construction, large addition can certainly have an impact on neighboring properties. A public hearing is held. That's what we're doing right now. The applicant presents, then there's commissioner questioning, followed by public comment. There's then cross-examination and rebuttal by the applicant, rebutting the public comment in some instances. The record is then technically supposed to be closed. I actually like what this body does, where they allow, it's more of a conversation. I think it speaks to what we talked about earlier about trying to find mutually agreeable solutions. I think it's, in some instances, you maybe need to be more formal, but most of the time I think it's okay to allow someone to step back up. Other boards and commissions are very formal. Where the record is closed, that means the applicant doesn't get to come back up there. He doesn't get to speak to you. Then it's between all of you to make a decision. Then there's commissioner deliberation. Then someone makes a motion. I always say in the affirmative. It just makes it easier to understand what somebody's proposing. A second is received. There should then be a call for additional debate on the motion on the table. There's typically no additional debate. And then there's a vote.
Excuse me. May I request a brief recess?
Sure.
2 hours in.
This is probably longer than people anticipated.
How much time do you think you have left? Because we also want to talk about it.
There's 8 more slides.
Okay, I'm okay to take a break. I mean, we're at 9 o'clock, so we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to get back to our meeting, and Cade's
ready?
going to finish his
All right.
overview. Thank you.
This is actually really exciting to me, this next portion. So we talked about the portions that are covered under binding design review. There's a whole separate set of items that come before this body as advisory and your recommending body. These include rescission or amendment of landmark designations. That's a process that City Council determines. Certificates of economic hardship. The commission can issue a certificate of economic hardship on its own, but if you recommend an incentive plan, the City Council has to approve that incentive plan. Economic hardship is often confused with an economic burden. So economic hardship is actually that you are completely eliminating one's use of their property and their return, their adequate return of value on that property through a decision that you are making. Now, the certificate of economic hardship allows for this incentive plan to make up that difference. And that might be a reduction in property taxes from the city. That might be, a one-time something payment or something, I'm not sure. An example might be, a one-story, two-story, two-part commercial building in the downtown that is zoned for such a significant amount of density that someone could build a 30-story building there. And this commission denies a request to demolish that building. That could be a situation where they have a claim of saying that you are depriving me of the value of my property. So these things are often conflated. They're not the same. Economic burden is not the same as an economic hardship. I don't think that a certificate of economic hardship has ever been awarded in the time that it's been here. And I think maybe only once or twice someone's applied for it. Yeah. Certificates of special merit, this is a decision by the City Council. This has to follow a denial by the commission. So the commission could deny demolition of something, and then they could come back and request a certificate of special merit. You're a recommending body on that. Basically what that is saying is that whatever they're proposing has such a significant public benefit that benefit outweighs retention of that resource. And so that becomes a political decision that then the City Council can decide. And I think there has been instances of those being awarded as well.
Good evening. I was observing and being in awe of all the information that Kate provided. But to answer your question quickly, when they demolished the ComEd power station on Clark Street, to take the entire block to build the movie theaters and the restaurants between Clark and Church on Maple. They denied the demolition of the power station. At the time, Norlight Theater proposed to build a new theater, or actually adapt that building as a theater. So there was a alternative solution to demolition, but the commission denied that. And then the applicants applied for economic hardship, where they show the benefits of the new development that will include the movie theaters and other mixed-use properties that would be commercial. And that's the only instance where I was involved directly with special merit. So it's possible.
The others here are applications for subdivision. That's a decision by City Council, by resolution. Applications for zoning variations and special uses. Applications for map and text amendments to the zoning ordinance, applications for plan developments, and also city projects and activities that don't require a permit. You're a recommending body for. That happened with the park most recently.
Would that include the Civic Center or something?
Yeah, it could. Yeah.
Do you happen to know, I know in the Northeast, there's a possibility for residential subdivision through like a more administrative route where you can actually just change the lot line without actually going through a
Sure.
subdivision process. Do you know if we have that in Evanston?
Yeah, I'm not certain I'm not certain. Yeah, sometimes people do like a pin split or something, like a different variation of that. Yeah, I'm not sure. So I think this is really critical here, advisory resource management and the types of resources that the ordinance talks about. So there's 4 of them. It talks about eligible resources, proposed resources, nominated resources, and registered resources. So eligible resources are resources that meet one or more of the criteria for designation, and it's really that simple. And there's probably, in all likelihood, hundreds, if not thousands of these that exist already across Evanston that are not registered. Now, what makes something a proposed resource? Well, these are resources that are formally determined by you as the commission as eligible, and they're placed on your ongoing study list, which you're empowered to create annually. And by placing these resources on the eligible study list, the commission is putting forward specific resources for consideration by anyone entitled to nominate them for future designation. Being placed on the study list, it's really giving these a reasonable assurance that the property can be successfully nominated. It's not saying certainly that it can, and that it would receive a favorable recommendation and report by the commission. There's nominated resources. These are ones that are formally nominated by filling out that single-page form, and these are offered interim protections under the code. And then there's ones that are already registered. These are resources formally nominated and subsequently registered as landmarks or districts by ordinance, and these are afforded all the protections under the preservation ordinance. And why this is important.
I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question? So for the study list, where is that located, and can we look at it on a regular basis?
Yeah, so it's not something that I think we kept a great record of until recently. It now exists on the Historic Preservation webpage. There's almost 100 resources. About 40 of those are resources that were identified in the downtown between 2 separate surveys. The remaining are properties that are already located in historic districts where those surveys done by consultants said that these are landmark eligible properties. So those properties already receive the protections. A landmark designation for those 60-some would be more of a celebratory honorary designation for them.
And then does the ordinance require us to consider or reconsider, I guess, the study list on a regular basis? Are we obligated to do that?
It doesn't, but just best practice dictates that you should. You don't necessarily need to do it annually, but you should basically resurvey the study list periodically, because being placed on the study list doesn't mean they have to come before you for a certificate of appropriateness. So they could alter them, they could bastardize these buildings, reduce their integrity to the point where maybe it doesn't deserve to be on that list anymore. There is no process in the ordinance for how to create the study list. There's no process for how to determine if it should be on it, if it should not be on it. Because the ordinance is silent on that and the city council rules are silent on that, it's really incumbent on this body to create a process through its rules and procedures if it wants something more formal on how it would undertake those. Putting something on that list.
So in the 2.5 years I've been on the commission, we have never looked at the study list as a group in the time I've been on the commission. So there are a few people that have been on the commission longer than me, of which, Beth, you've been on the commission longer than me.
Yeah, no, not as a group. We did the walking assessment as groups last summer, spring, which was incredible.
But the actual study list itself, which is a thing, that exists and is mentioned in the ordinance, is not something that has come to us on a regular basis. So that might be something we want to talk about putting on our agenda in some fashion. We can designate a month.
And even highlighting for the public too, that it's there.
And that's how it's intended. It's intended that you are, as a body, you are proposing specific resources for their future nomination, and that the public is the one that's considering that proposal.
Well, there's even, I mean, I know that there isn't an official process right now, but if something is on a list as an eligible landmark, and let's say a demolition permit is issued for one of those buildings, like the fire warehouse building that was currently, that's almost 98% demolished right now, on Oak, is there an internal process so that the city is aware, if there's a demolition permit pulled, and they can say, oh, this is on some short list of potential landmark, and then they can be alerted, so that the commission can weigh in on its validity of being a landmark or not.
So this is what it looks like currently. It lists the address, it lists the architect if it's known, the year built if it's known, the criteria believed to be that it's eligible under, and when it was determined that it was eligible. So you'll see some of these early ones, 2007, this was the first downtown survey that happened. And then you'll see down here, there's residential areas. These come 2012, that's a Lakeshore Historic District resurvey where the consultant determined eligibility in certain circumstances.
So I didn't realize the importance of this in the time that I've been chair, but now that I understand it, I am happy to put this on the agenda at some point in the near future, and anyone who is chair after me any of you can say, we haven't looked at the study list for a while, let's look at the study list. We could potentially we could make a subcommittee that is
Yeah,
or a working group or
I did a little research. It's typical in a lot of communities. It's actually typical in a lot of communities to have some kind of crowdsourced effort to collect from the community what resources are important to you, and then have a subcommittee that vets those, and then they bring a list to the full body basically just for approval. Is pretty typical. A lot of places will do this every year. They'll add resources to it. And I'll kind of explain the reason why this is really important and what the intention behind it is. But when you place something on this study list, when you're saying that we are proposing these for future nomination, it allows you to be a recommending body for plan developments, zoning variations, zoning amendments, map and text, and special and conditional uses for those resources. So if there's a plan development in the downtown for one of these resources that's not registered currently, but it's on this list, they have to present that to this body before they go to the Land Use Commission. And what this body is doing is you're determining its significance. Is this building significant? Should it be removed or not? And those findings of fact are really critical for the Land Use Commission to effectively understand if that standard that they have for approving plan developments is met or if it isn't met. This also provides a space and an opportunity for members of the public to come and voice those concerns too. This is a resource that we want to retain. It's part of our identity. And I think that's the intention behind it. This is common across a lot of really strong preservation ordinances across the country to have something like this. And what it really does is it slows and decommodifies the development process in Evanston. And I think that's important.
So, Kate, this is a list. I guess I'm just trying to understand why they aren't landmarks. Like, why are they on this list, just like biding their time until someone wants to demo it or something, and then we look at it? Like, why aren't we just putting these through to if
I think it's because nomination, especially in the environment we live in now, it's a highly political, it can be a highly litigious process. And it's not something typically that a commission would want to involve itself with. So what you're saying is we are identifying these as what we believe are significant. We believe that they should be not actively managed, but if there are non-as-of-right proposals for these properties, these should be part of those considerations and part of that conversation. But you're also welcoming members of the public to nominate these things. And you're welcoming property owners themselves to nominate them too.
I mean, the nomination process is pretty in depth.
Do people, like homeowners, property owners, business owners, do they even know they're on this list?
Yeah, so that's when I talked about there's no process.
Okay.
So when Carl mentioned the 1840 oak with the fireproof warehouse that was recently demolished that Northwestern Health System owned, they would not, that's a situation where, because that's something they could do as of right, that would never have come before this commission. It could allow planning staff and community development department to make more effective planning decisions, we could have reached out to the property owner. But to your point, that property owner had no way of knowing that they were on this list. And if they had known it, maybe it would have changed their mind, maybe it wouldn't, I don't know. But I think that when we create, and I think we should create a more formalized process for how this happens, the property owner needs to be notified that they're on this list and what that means, that it's just advisory.
Yeah, I just wonder if, like, if in terms of property owners, I don't know about businesses, if there was like a one-pager where, you know, you kind of try to market it like as a good thing, like, hey, you're on this list, like, there's some cachet, I think, to being a landmark property. And
It should be a
Evanston.
celebratory tool
No, I
and
think it
explain
actually
why it's
helps
significant.
sell your house. I mean, people like, that's the character, like you said, in Evanston, that people actually like. So maybe you could get, if homeowners knew they were eligible, like maybe you would get some homeowners who would want to do that themselves. Like, it wouldn't be contentious. It would actually be like, you know, you might get a few, you might convert some of those, I guess is my thought, if they knew.
Yeah, and it's less typical from what I can tell to have residential properties on a study list.
Okay.
And the reason for that is they're not inherently threatened by their
Right.
development potential in the way that commercial properties, especially in like a downtown area, are threatened, or like a Chicago Avenue corridor, where the development potential is so significant that those properties, they're just threatened to a higher degree than a lot of residential properties would be.
Okay.
This I really want to touch on. There's many powers and duties related to program administration. Some are just maintaining the official registry of landmarks and historic districts, preparing and distributing your own application forms. That's something other boards and commissions don't get to do. You get to prepare your own application forms. You can amend them, modify them, what requirements you want to see on those. One big one here that I will highlight is to assist in development and review of preservation chapter of the comprehensive plan. This is something that the city is undertaking this upcoming year. We're going to write a new comprehensive plan, and that consultant and that team will come before this body, and you will help them write that chapter, and you will review what they write in that chapter. And that's really critical. That's the most significant guiding policy document that a city has. And so that's probably the most powerful thing that you have. We talked about enforcement, the last one on here. You are empowered to compel the community development department to take legal action against anyone believed to be in violation of the ordinance. I don't know that that's ever happened. It's probably a little more formal than it needs to be. You could probably just send me an email and say that you saw something and ask an inspector to go out and look at it.
That's what I was going to ask. If you see something happening, the process is to let you know?
Yeah.
Is that the thing?
Yes,
And then you have somebody you can talk to that would
correct.
send someone out? Okay.
And we periodically, I don't know if I did it last year, but I make an attempt every fall to do reconnaissance surveys, drive-by windshield surveys of the districts, just to check for something that really stands out, like, oh, wow, there's a second-story addition on that house all of a sudden or something. One of the powers and duties you have is to participate in the Certified Local Government Program. So what does that mean? Being a certified local government means that the state and federal government recognize Evanston as having special expertise in the area of preservation. And what that does is it allows you to review and comment on both Section 707, which is kind of the statewide companion legislation to Section 106, which is a federal review under the National Historic Preservation Act. These are often handled internally by staff. The most frequent that we get are like installation of like wireless cell towers, those type of things that are relatively benign. But if there's some that are more significant, they can come before the commission. Review and comment on proposed nominations to the National Register. That's happened in the past. Prepare an annual report supplied to the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. This is something that we've done internally, but it might make some sense to bring it before this body before we send it to you. They ask pretty routine questions, a number of cases you reviewed, number of denials, types of cases, how many commissioners you have, number of meetings held. We send all our approved minutes to the State Preservation Agency every year. And this is really the precursor, allows us to then create our own annual report that we submit to City Council. It also allows you to access statewide grant funding programs and matching grant programs. We've used those in the past to fund, in part, some survey work in Evanston.
I just want to comment for those of you who aren't yet very familiar with CLG, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Cities, preservation programs can get money, like to do real things.
So
I'm just saying,
so
CLG is a big thing.
No, it is, because
Yeah.
every year Congress appropriates money to the Historic Preservation Fund. And the Historic Preservation Fund is a national fund that then goes to every state that helps finance the State Historic Preservation Office. And then the State Historic Preservation Office has that money sitting for CLGs to do survey work and, I mean, you name it. We can apply and then have that financed. So it, like you said, it's a really good opportunity.
I don't know a single program that provides more money
Yeah.
to preservation commissions than the CLG program.
Yeah.
And it's just not something that comes up on a regular basis. So if you're not familiar with what CLG is, I invite you to do more your own research on that, because it's a big, big thing.
In the last 5 years, Kate, since you've been here, what would be, have there been examples of undertakings by this body to participate in that? Like, meaning, like, we've got an idea for a program and getting it funded?
I think the last thing that they funded through that was in 2015, which was the landmark survey, individual landmark survey. And it might have helped fund the process for recording landmark status on titles for properties, which we didn't do prior to that as well. But we also funded the 2012 Lakeshore Historic District Survey through that. It's not, something, when we prepared the Preserve 2040 plan, that's absolutely something that other communities access CLG funding to hire a consultant to pay for. In my previous job, almost all of our preservation plans were in part funded by CLG funds.
So we did Preserve 2040 in-house,
Yeah, we did that
but you
in-house,
can't,
yeah.
we did it in-house.
Yeah.
But it is possible to get CLG funds to hire a consultant to do a plan like 2040. But we did it, Kate did it, Kate and some of us,
Commissioned it.
yeah.
Was that because it's onerous, or you just had your own, it was just more straightforward to do it
I just don't think we needed in that instance to access the funds. I think we're, in some ways, we're lucky as a municipality to have the planning staff that we have. A lot of places that would hire a consultant to do that kind of work and access to CLG funding, they might have one staff planner that has no expertise in preservation. They might have a preservation commission that no one on the commission has expertise. Some of the other things you can access through CLG funding are trainings, training programs, things like that. Yeah, I think so.
But if we wanted to use that money to resurvey, like the Ridge Historic District, what would that look like? I mean, would we need to make a motion in the body and then agree to, for one of us to, engage CLG for that money?
Yeah, I
Like-
don't think and Carlos could speak to it, but I don't think the request for funding comes before the commission necessarily.
For the record, I'm Carlos Ruiz. I don't think I said my name earlier. Anyway, so I was able to request 2 times funding from the state through the CLG, but it's a 30/70 program. In other words, we have to have money allocated to pay 30% of the total cost. So it's not just free money. So it's reimbursed. So we have to pay the consultant the total amount, and then the state will reimburse 30% of that. And we have to prepare the reports, and if it's, usually the program is for 2 years from the beginning to the end. And during that period, you have to have periodical reports of your progress, and then you have a final report where you show how you spent the money, who was involved. And we also recruited volunteers, and staff time is part of our 30% contribution. So we put certain value to my time, when I spend time doing the research or helping the consultant, whatever time I spend doing the grant, I will put it in my timesheet, and then at the end, it was something that the city contributed. So it's not all cash, but I think that in the 2040 plan, you have so many goals that I don't think it would be necessarily advisable that you always provide in kind. I think it would be better to propose a budget to city council for these purposes so that staff would not take time to do the work of the consultant. In other words, we do have the cash rather than in kind. So I think it's very important to put that up front, because I think that just looking at the amount of work that currently in the last couple of years, okay, and this commission has done, it's a lot to ask, and then add something that requires dedication and time, like a survey in the Rich Historic District, for instance. In the past, the community was lucky because we had apparently an army of volunteers, or at least 2 very dedicated citizens who actually spend the time doing the survey themselves and taking photographs and everything. But that was a committed person who did that. But now people are busy, they don't have the time to do that. So that's why, I encourage this commission to actually find a way, mechanism to propose city council to dedicate funds so that we can apply for the CLGs. Now, my experience with that is that if we get it this year, perhaps we won't get it next year, because they try to go around what communities need the most help to begin with. Not the ones, I will say that over time, Evanston, through this commission, has earned certain reputation that way maybe we are not necessarily the most needed or needy of funding, but I think that the Rich Historic District is a good candidate to show that it's needed. So if you plan to do something, I would say for the 2025 budget, maybe you should put together a plan. This is how much it will cost to hire a consultant, and the city can dedicate the 30%. Now, it's no guarantee, because once you apply, you have competition with other communities that are looking for the same funding. Mm-hmm. So it's not guaranteed, but it's available, and we have used it, fortunately.
And I think we did request funding in this year's budget to resurvey the Ridge Historic District. I don't know the results of that or if it's still in the budget. But I think we proposed paying for all of it, and then you would apply to get reimbursed basically through a portion of it.
So that's good news, because now the next cycle, if the funding, again, every year there's funding from the federal government. Again, the state doesn't take it for guarantee that it's going to come. But if it did come, and if we apply, and the city council approves that budget, then I think by the month of August or something, you need to be alerted when the cycle will start, when we can apply, because it's a few months before they actually adjudicate the funding. So you cannot apply the last minute. I would not recommend to do that. It's very competitive. You have to have ready. And the other thing is, you have to submit a budget with your application. So you need to talk to consultants, to tax them. We plan to apply for the grant. How much? Give us an estimate, a preliminary estimate, so that in the application we will put how much money it will cost.
Yeah. Okay. This one we talked about really quickly, but if there's ever a time where you believe the ordinance is not being followed, the first point of contact should be, myself or Carlos. And if necessary, if we don't know the answer to the question, we'll coordinate a meeting with the Corporation Counsel and the Law Department to get a formal interpretation on something. We talked about you can formally petition the Community Development Department to take legal action against somebody. And then enforcement in the ordinance is not really a power that's afforded the commission other than that, so that's handled through staff itself. This is the procedure to amend the ordinance. This has changed, I think, recently, the last 2 years, the process for this. But amendments to the ordinance are considered policy changes. Because they're considered policy changes, they can only be amended through what's called a formal referral process. That's made either by a council member, the mayor, or the city manager. And any referral requires 2 co-sponsors. So if you're a council member and you want to make a referral to amend a portion of the ordinance, you also need 2 additional council members to say, yes, I agree with you, to get that on the referrals committee agenda. And then the referrals committee will they basically assign a score to it, what's the urgency, they set a timeline for when it will be heard, and what body will review that proposed change. Most likely that would come back here, where it would be referred back to this commission to come up with the actual language behind it, the structure behind what those changes are, and then that would go forward for a vote at city council would be the process. The commission, you can make recommendations on amendments to either the ordinance itself, the zoning, or the building code. This is really just done by testifying before city council. You could say that there is a need for this to happen, and we think that this should happen. You could also do that informally just by contacting a council member. And then opportunities to further align with best practices. Our ordinance is actually really good. It really is. There's some aspects of it that could be changed, but I would consider it a strong ordinance. Here are some items that other kind of model ordinances across the country have that we don't. One is demolition review. I'll use that as an example. One is this idea of conservation districts. Really the goals and objectives of the ordinance speak to neighborhood stabilization, which speaks to conservation districts to me, but there's no actual process in the ordinance for what that looks like, how it would be created. The simplest way to put it is that a conservation district is what I always call, it's kind of historic preservation light in a way. It's typically a portion of the city that might not meet the traditional criteria for designation as a district, but it has a very cohesive land use pattern and built fabric associated with it. And this could be, it can be as small as a block. It can be as large as a larger district. And then really the key difference between the two is that a district is kind of a top-down approach where we nominate it, it goes to city council, it gets designated, and then you have to meet these associated standards for review. Where a conservation district is almost bottom-up, where the neighborhood itself is saying what's significant, what aspects of these resources we want to retain, and how do we want to conduct design review for these. So they might decide that we're getting really inappropriate second-story additions. There might be a lot of workers' cottages and bungalows, and there's this cohesive land use pattern, and it's intimately tied to our identity as a neighborhood. But we're getting a lot of tear downs, or we're getting a lot of second-story additions that are incompatible. So they might say we want to be a conservation district, but we only want to review demolition, and we only want to review second-story additions. We don't want you to tell us we don't want review for replacing our windows. Some places will have separate neighborhood boards conduct the design review. Others have a commission conduct the design review for them. But it's really kind of a frontier of preservation in a lot of ways.
Typically, does that increase the property value in one of those?
I think any time you stabilize a neighborhood, you likely increase property values to some extent. It's a complicated question with a really complicated set of answers. The simple answer is that an assessor does not assign a special value to something being historic when he assesses your property. But just through the nature of stabilizing the neighborhood, everyone buying into the same idea that we will maintain our properties to meet this common set of standards, it typically increases property values, at least modestly. We don't. One was proposed in the 1990s, and that is a time when this was a very early concept in this country. It really hasn't taken hold in Illinois at all that I can tell. There's many states that do this all over. Even some highly conservative states have really robust conservation district programs. I think the city of Urbana is the only one in Illinois that has it.
I think the city of Evanston has areas that could have conservation districts. So we have the potential for some good conservation districts. It's a grassroots approach to preservation, and it could totally work here.
Who nominates those?
It comes from the
community.
The community. So it's not a nomination.
So it's
yeah.
kind of like it's like how a block would come together and
Yeah.
say, we want to create a block club, kind of the same way, like saying, like a certain percentage of the block came together and said, like Kate said, like they have second story additions and we want to stop that or we want to review it. but I think it's like a black club.
It's a
basically.
really significant tool for maintaining affordability in a lot of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That's one of its primary reasons that it exists in a lot of places, because the affordability goes away. These places, when we talked about resources being threatened and residential resources inherently not being as threatened, sometimes very modest vernacular resources that are smaller are highly threatened because they're not as valuable and they can be purchased and either torn down or they can add a second story to it and you can double the value after that happens.
No, it's okay. The other thing about conservation districts, from my perspective, is that it gives people an opportunity who value places that aren't necessarily important or don't necessarily have meaning. Important's the wrong word, but don't have necessarily like big meaning based on their architecture, but they in the community know that it's valuable to them, and they understand the more cultural significance to these places. So then they get to have a say over how it's the Preservation Commission. It's not, these aren't like registered landmarks, but the Preservation Commission in Evanston is here to support people who want to try to create a conservation district for themselves.
Is it a tool against gentrification?
Is it a tool against gentrification? This is a longer conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
It is a
And-
longer, I mean,
yeah.
it certainly could be. That's such a loaded term too that I don't, for a
Right.
lot of, I always struggle, that term means different things to different people, so it's hard to answer that yes or no. But what I can say is that it's an effective tool to stabilize a neighborhood.
There are whole areas of Evanston that do not have registered districts, but that mean something to the people who live there. So a conservation district could be a tool for them, and the Preservation Commission is here to help them do that. But we're trying to spread the word about, to try to explain
I think it's
what a
just loaded with
conservation-
misconception of what
It
it
is.
is, and what it actually means. One is, some model ordinances have separate criteria for cultural or historic designations that aren't architectural. Ours does not. Many have demolition by neglect provisions. I think we just don't because we have a very strong property standards code, but it's something that you could have. Like Carl mentioned earlier, review of critical landscape features, heritage trees, our standards don't really speak to that. Deconstruction, appeal process modification. A lot of places, the appeal process goes directly to circuit court. That's not the case here. The idea behind that is that a city council is a legislative body. It's not a judicial body, so it shouldn't be taking judgment on things like that, that if someone wants to appeal something, that it should go to circuit court. I don't necessarily have strong opinions on that. And then binding design review and technical assistance through subcommittees or separate boards. This is something you're seeing more frequently across the country. I think recently the city of San Antonio kind of separated these two to kind of create a separate body that does the technical assistance and actually conducts the design review separate from the body that focuses more on policy decisions, education, advocacy. We are. And then I'll touch on this. One is what demolition review and demolition delay, they're technically different, but they're very interconnected. Demolition delay lives in a preservation ordinance. It's often in a preservation ordinance that doesn't allow the commission to deny demolition. So in lieu of denying demolition, they can mandate a period of time where they can work with the property owner to find some kind of alternative solution. Because we can deny demolition, that's probably why we don't have it. Now, demolition review is an entirely separate animal. It usually lives in a zoning code or even a building code. This is usually a citywide policy. It's not specific to preservation. What this does is it usually sets a period of time and age for a building. If it meets that category, it's usually reviewed by staff first, and if staff feels like it might meet some of the eligibility criteria, it's referred to the commission to review, and if the commission agrees that it might be significant, they can institute a period of demolition delay for that resource, either for someone to nominate it or to work with the property owner to find alternative solutions, in some cases even find a buyer to buy it, find a alternative location for whatever they're proposing, those types of things. And many built-out communities similar to Evanston, they just kind of adhere to that 50-year standard that the National Register has. Anything that's 50 years or older, it kind of triggers this process. And then just for some context, I did do some research. We issue somewhere between 15 and 20 demolition permits per year. And when I say demolition permits, that means wholesale demolition of a house or of a building. There's many, many, many more demolition permits for accessory structures and interior demolition. And those are all, we're lucky that we separate all three of those. So it's really easy data to pull up. But we demolish around 15 homes per year in Evanston. So this wouldn't necessarily be a huge burden to kind of review these. Here's kind of how the process typically looks. You have the demolition permit application. Is a building over 50 years? Is it under 50 years? If it's under 50 years, the demo permit is issued. If it's over 50 years, the staff planner reviews it. If they determine it's likely eligible, they refer it to the Preservation Commission. If the commission determines it's not eligible, the demolition permit is issued. If they determine it is eligible, then they can invoke demolition delay, and then they have kind of a series of options. You can either undertake nomination proceedings, you can find some kind of alternative solution. If no solution is no agreement is come to, and the delay ends, then the demo permit is issued, or if you undertake nomination, it's either registered or it's not registered. So this is kind of the process. The window of demolition delay is really varied across the country. It's anywhere from 30 days to, I think the max I saw was 320 days or something.
But this is a typical process, not what's happening here in Evanston.
Correct.
So we'd
This
have
is just
to,
typical. We
we'd
do
have
not
to,
have this.
yeah.
Yep.
So Kate, it's nearly 10 o'clock.
That's it.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to remind everyone that, the right to own property is also a kind of a fundamental right in the United States. It's the basis for our economy. So, when we are here telling people what they can and cannot do with their properties, we have to take that seriously. We have the right to do that too, but it's a serious thing. Did we had the discussion during the ordinance review, so did you want to say anything else, or should we move on to this last? Say thank you, Kate, and move on, or did you have any
I
other
was going to say
questions?
thank you. And is this presentation itself available on the website? Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
The slides you've made, okay, thank you very
Wonderful.
much. And it'll also be on YouTube, because it's part of this, and we'll put it in the newsletter, and you all are welcome to go back and look at it, watch parts of it or whatever. Thank you, Kate, for doing that. We appreciate it. We only have one more item, I think. Yeah. One more item on here, which is short. Nomination period for 2024 officers and 2024 annual housekeeping items.
Yeah, I'll keep this really brief, but the nomination period is now open for nominating individuals on the commission to serve as either chair, vice chair, or secretary. I tried to be somewhat comprehensive in the memo, but you can nominate yourself. You don't have to wait for someone to nominate you. I always ask somebody if they accept the nomination, so you're not going to be surprised during the meeting that you're suddenly nominated. It's been more typical in the past for a series of phone calls and emails to understand who's been nominated for what roles, and to just have a single slate of electors instead of actual votes. But I did want to say that if for some reason there are two individuals that are nominated for, secretary or something, those votes are anonymous, so don't feel like, we'll do it by ballot, so you don't have to feel like you're, I don't be more vulnerable in who you were picking to take these specific roles. And then the process, you can just send me an email if you want to nominate somebody. At our next meeting in December, we will make the actual nominations known. These are the individuals that have been nominated, and then the vote happens in January. And that's just, it kind of makes more logical sense to have the vote in December, but the ordinance specifically says it has to happen in January, so that's what we'll do.
And so it says 2024, so it's annually, this happens?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
And there's no term limit, so you can serve as many times as you as you'd like.
So maybe a dumb question, but obviously your role is very clear, running the show. Oh, and I would imagine that secretary, like as staff, you're recording all of this. So what does
Yeah.
the secretary actually do?
I think, so, yeah, the secretary's duties are really just kind of deferred to staff. Like, for all intents and purposes, I act more as the commission secretary. But vice chair has their main role is to assume the role of chair when the chair is absent. That probably happens at least once a year, I would think. And it's probably good that it happens once a year, honestly, to have someone step into that role. More importantly, the three officers they're individuals that staff consults with more directly if there's some kind of issue, misunderstanding, controversy, applications that might be really contentious that we know are coming. We'll reach out to the officer of the commission first. Or if we have questions about administering the ordinance or making decisions on administrative reviews, we typically reach out to the officers of the commission to answer those questions.
So that's separate from the pre-review commission or
Correct.
committee
Yep.
that you've mentioned. Okay.
Yeah. I think
Was there any other questions about that? Okay. Well, seeing none, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned. It is 9:55 PM. Thank you again, Cade, for that presentation.